My name is Jan Nielsen. I'm a recently retired teacher in South London, but still an activist in the NUT, and I'm going to be chairing the meeting. The meeting is on Is Another School Possible? And we've got a fantastic panel this morning. But I'm just going to say, just in case it doesn't come up in the discussion, obviously, education has never been as political, I don't think, as it is at the moment. But I just do want to pay a little tribute to the boys at Isker Academy in Exeter. I hope everybody saw the story. Well done, yeah, clap for the boys. Yeah? To take on the management in that way, don those, what I thought were rather ugly skirts, given donated by their sisters and girlfriends, and won a bloody victory. So well done for them, and let's hope that inspires. I would like to see students organising a boycott of Saturday detentions. That would be my message to young people in schools at the moment. Okay, so that's my bit. Now to the really interesting people. I'll introduce them all now. Our first speaker is going to be Alan Gibbons, who probably needs very little introduction to any of you. A campaigner for education, for comprehensive quality education, and a fantastic author. And I'd like to see his two most recent books, The Trap, which is about terrorism, and Alan generally writes for sort of 10-year-olds to 13-year-olds, I think, and The Beautiful Game, a book about the Hillsborough tragedy for 10-year-olds. And I'd like to particularly thank him for the hours of stimulation and pleasure he gave to my own sons. So thank you, Alan. Alan's going to be leading. Good. Start with a laugh. Yeah. Alan's going to be leading off the panel today. And our second speaker, and we're very grateful to have Alex, who has come on a number of years to the Marxism event.
I've never stimulated your children.
Alex, we work very closely with Alex. He's convener of the Socialist Teachers Alliance, and he's a member of the NUT Executive for London. And the final speaker on the platform, again somebody I know very well, Sara Tomlinson, a teacher from South London, and Sarah has been at the forefront in the union of running a number of campaigns against particularly the testing of primary school children. So with no further ado, I'm going to open the floor to, I should say, sorry if you've never been here before, they will all speak for various amounts of time, depending on what I decide really, and then we will open it up for contributions and discussions, and I will just say, please, if there's parents in the room and non-teachers, because the teachers will be the first with their hands up, I know they will, yeah, but please, it's nice to hear from parents about their experiences. So we'll start off with Alan.
Good. Right, comrades, brothers and sisters, friends, I think the culture of education, the culture of a school, is defined predominantly by children. I think for all socialists, we start from the rank and file. We start from the most oppressed, the most exploited, and it's the condition of those people that defines the society around them. Now, when we take that, a number of propositions. In any school, in any education system worth its salt, basically children should be happy and safe. Well, we do not too badly on safe, actually. When I arrive at school to do a school visit, it's a bit like, well, I'm not like Tom Cruise, don't get me wrong, but it's a bit like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. I have to be optometrically scanned, I need to show me DBS, me passport, keypads, and eventually get in the school. So it's safe, you can't get out the bloody car park in some schools. But when it comes to happy, we do not do anywhere near as well. A Children's Society survey placed UK children in 14th place out of 15 countries. The most unhappy country was South Korea. In South Korea, driven by competition, you have 5.5 hours in school as an adolescent and 5.5 hours of cramming lessons. South Korea is top of a very unenviable league table, and that is the highest adolescent suicide rate in the world. When we take a look at mental health, 250,000 of our children are receiving mental health care. Now, not all of that is stress, of course, but a substantial amount of it is. Somebody's dropped the false teeth, don't worry. Childline has reported a doubling of the number of children contemplating suicide in 5 years. Now, on that, I think we can say with some certainty, stress, the examination systems and various other issues like that, they will have contributed to that. There's no obvious kind of other variable that would have led to that significant change. 43% of mental health specialists think services are getting worse. Now, part of that, I believe, is testing. The single thermometer, if you want, of British education at the moment is probably testing, running concurrently with the crisis in school budgets. Now, when you take a look at what testing does, let's just take 2 countries. Michael Gove, when he was Education Secretary, waved in front of all teachers like a badge of dishonour, "You must be like China." Now, get this right. China was not top of the international PISA league tables. The Shanghai metropolitan region was. The Shanghai metropolitan region does not test internal migrants. That doesn't mean kids from somewhere else. It means kids from villages. So no wonder they had a relatively good set of results. The Gaokao is is the ultimate, if you want, in high stakes tests. In 2009, nearly a quarter of 2,500 students surveyed in Shanghai said they had considered suicide. This is absolutely catastrophic. You get on the bus to go to the Gaokao exam. If you come back as a failure, you have dishonoured your family. That is the kind of example that Michael Gove and after him Nicky Morgan thought you could pursue as some sort of enviable destination. South Korea, the suicide capital of the world. In South Korea, suicide rates of those aged 10 to 24 is 9.4. In the rest of the OECD, it is 6.5. It was said that from 2001 to 2011, the number of suicides amongst the country's youth had increased by 57%. This is extraordinary and tragic. So, when we take a look at our system, you could not design a better system to drive our children and our teachers insane. Traditionally, primary education, which is predominantly what I worked in, had one high-stakes test back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, which was the 11 plus, and it was extremely damaging. I think we are now in a worse situation in many ways than the 11 plus, because then you had formative testing, your spelling tests, multiplication tests, and they weren't administered in that friendlier way. They were pretty horrible at times, but there was only one high-stakes reported test. We got to the situation there were going to be 4. There was the SAT test. Now, a test that claims to deliver results that are verifiable and trustworthy has to basically have control mechanisms and should be roughly similar every year. The SAT test has evolved and changed more dramatically than the faces of some Hollywood movie stars. This is ludicrous. They were totally unreliable tests, and they manufactured right the way through Year 1, Year 3. At one time we were going to do SATs every single year, if you remember. There were going to be geography SATs. There were going to be technology SATs. There were going to be history SATs. I trialled them for my primary school. Imagine if they got to the road where we'd had 9 sets of SAT tests administered at 2 levels and intermediate SAT tests. All of this was being lined up. We didn't win the absolute abolition of, sorry, my God. I don't think my voice needs much of a mic. We didn't get to the situation because even though we didn't win all of the various attempts to boycott, we did actually slow the whole operation down. We emasculated the SATs to some extent. Then the SPAG tests. Nothing to do with Bolognese, spelling, punctuation and grammar. The only trouble is they invent the bloody spelling, punctuation and grammar. I have studied languages since 1971 and linguistics. I'd never heard the term fronted adverbial.
No, exactly.
There was suddenly a panoply of ludicrous terms, and children had to go hunting like little mongooses hopping about in the jungle. Oh, there's a fronted adverbial, tremble of excitement, nose fluttering. This is utter madness. Phonics tests. We need to know the 44 phonemes of the English language. It's an alphabetic system. But that is the beginning of the journey of reading. Once you've got that, you've got one of the keys to the door. That is all you've got. Jim Rose, when he launched synthetic, first fast and only synthetic phonics, in the United Kingdom said phonics situated within a strong element of reading for pleasure. Now that, the second element, never appeared in British education. What we had instead was an absolute obsession with barking out letters, with phonemes and graphemes. I saw year one children being asked, is this a phoneme or a grapheme? This is ludicrous to impose these kind of technical terms that we would have known probably around O-level, A-level, if then. It is not the technique that teaches you to read, it's the immersion, the experience, the joy, the pleasure, the engagement. And all of those things that refine reading, that help children to read words that look the same but sound different and mean something different, none of that was in place. None of that was rigorously pursued. Oh my God, I've just begun. So,
No, you're fine, no.
in its own terms, she was waving 2 minutes. In its own terms, does it work? In our terms, obviously, it doesn't work. I forgot to say the baseline test. The most ludicrous of the lot, they gave 5 different vulture-like Tory entrepreneurs a testing regime for 4-year-old children. Every single one of the ways of testing was different. One was by a computer program, one was by an interview, one was by a pencil paper test. And in all these wonderful primary testing, too young to test, what were they called, picnics, that we had all over Britain, we kept saying you cannot compare these results. Number one, it's fundamentally wrong to have a high-stakes reported test for a 4-year-old. Number two, it won't work in your terms. They said it will. They made teachers do roughly 52 hours of work on this that they could have done with children, and then it collapsed completely because they couldn't correlate the results. Now that means that if that system had succeeded, it would have been even worse than it is now. The trade unions, the NUT, the ATL and so on, have actually fought a rearguard action to prevent the most extreme forms of this madness. But even the system we've got now is fundamentally damaging to the mental health and the expectations of our children. Because not only does it not work in terms of what we want to see, the flourishing of the human personality, children being respected, children exploring and accessing the world around them, children not knowing the destination of the journey of learning before they embark, of hypothesizing and of subjecting reality to examination. That is the form of that we want to see. But even in the terms of Her Majesty's government, the Conservative Party in office, it doesn't work for them. They quote at any teachers and children in this room that they are failures by waving in front of them the PISA international rankings. After all this testing, after all this drilling, after all this bullying, after all this lying and massaging that they go through, the United Kingdom for reading ends up at 21st place. Here's some of the countries above them. We expect Singapore. It's one of those testing regimes. Hang on. Number 2, Canada. Whoa, dude. People in lumberjack shirts who think creativity's pretty cool, who've not got too many tests. What? Oh my God, Finland! Those bloody Nordic hippies, they don't test till 17, they don't have an Ofsted regime, they don't have league tables. How can they do? Estonia! Oh my, Ireland! Irish teachers do not arrive in school till 20 past 8, and they leave half an hour before the end of the day in most Irish schools. I actually met an Irish socialist teacher, said maybe we should be a bit like Britain. I said, no we shouldn't, no we shouldn't. And Some of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil amazingly are looking to try and follow England.
Yeah, no.
Please,
Don't.
any Irish comrades, do not do that. It is, as Chris Rea would say, the road to hell. So very briefly, we managed to stop hell so our children and teachers and parents live through purgatory. I would quite like us to start, in the terms of Dante and Beatrice, to formulate some policies that might just take us to the fringes of heaven. That's the discussion we've got to begin.
Alex is going to try and follow that.
Got my fidget spinner.
You got your...
I thought Alan was going to say Irish teachers arrive at 8:20 and leave half an hour before that. Which probably some of them do. So thank you very much. Can I just say, I spent part of yesterday at an event called Palestine Expo at Queen Elizabeth Hall. If you've got some spare time today, you should go down there. It's taking place over 5 floors of the Queen Elizabeth Centre. 7,000 people visited it yesterday, mainly Muslim families from all over the country. But it's a fantastic celebration of Palestinian culture, but also a celebration of the defiance of the Palestinian people. And the NUT is running a stall there where we're showing films that we've made with school children and with teachers in Palestine about their situation there. So if you have got time, do get down there. It's an amazing event. So 30 years ago this week, I stepped through the doors of Stepney Green School in Tower Hamlets to start my career as a teacher, and I still work there. I don't work there full time, I work there part of the week, and I'll explain why that's a little bit relevant later. But I'm still teaching there part of the week. So who's a teacher here? So I just want to get a sense of the audience. Right, lots of, and anyone a parent and not a teacher? A parent but not a teacher? Okay, all right, thank you. So this is called Another School is Possible, or Is Another School Possible? And I think Sarah, Alan and I have probably spoken on loads of platforms with that title or variations of that title. I think the significance of this meeting for me is that for the first time in a generation, that isn't an abstract question. I think that's a very real question, because I think we're at what many people call a conjuncture of 2 things coming together. The first is what's happened within the Labour Party and the Corbyn surge, as I think you've been calling it this weekend. Because for the first time, it's possible to think of a left Labour government coming to office with a policy, with an education policy, talking about a national education service, the like of which we can engage with, the like of which we can shape and form. Now, in order for that to happen, we need a big movement outside Parliament in order to make that happen. But I think that's a very exciting thing for us to be happening. But the second thing that's happening is I think it's really possible now to describe the project that Margaret Thatcher started 30 years ago as running out of road. I think the Tory project for education is seriously running out of road, and they haven't got a project. Their academies programme, although it's limping forward, is nothing of the type they wanted. They wanted big academy chains. They wanted big corporate academy chains running loads of schools around the country, and it hasn't worked. That's the most damaged aspect of their academy programme. What we're seeing now is defensive multi-academy trusts in local areas, which we are still trying to stop, but they're nothing like what the government wanted to happen. They've been forced back on selection. And on the issue that Alan was talking about, I think their testing and assessment programme has reached its zenith. It's on the downward curve now, and that poses questions for us and challenges to us and opportunities to us. But everybody, apart from them, described the testing system as broken and flawed. You also see a situation now where the new Ofsted inspector talks about freeing schools from the data cage. Yeah. She says we shouldn't be assessing schools on data, we should be assessing... Now that's a remarkable thing. Ofsted are the provisional wing of government education policy. That is a remarkable thing for an Ofsted inspector to be saying. We also have Ofsted intervening on questions like workload. Sean Harford, the Ofsted Chief Inspector for Schools, says that heads should be negotiating on workload with schools. Now, these things are a remarkable turnaround for what's happening in education and give us a big opportunity. Now, the NUT, my union, has played a major part in bringing some of that into happening. Our strikes in 2015 2015 and 2013 saw Michael Gove and Nicky Morgan get sacked within weeks of our strikes. Our workload campaign is nothing like enough. We haven't achieved the big breakthrough, but it is creating situations where heads and others are saying, we've got to talk about this. We've got to address this problem of teacher recruitment and retention, which the Tories have failed on. Sarah will talk about the SATS campaign, and Alan's talked about the SATS campaign, but we're building a huge alliance on the issue of testing and assessment, which I think is starting to break through and shift the dynamic of the conversation. And the funding campaign, I particularly want to talk about just some of the things we did on that, because we created a situation, we operated on a scale like we haven't before, right across our union. I hope if you're not a teacher, you saw our School Cuts website and you were able to witness some of the things we were doing. But just some figures from the big campaign that we put at the heart of the general election. A Facebook video that we put up had 4.5 million views on YouTube. There was only one election video that had more views than that. It was clear that education funding was what people were talking about in the election. Tory MPs said to Theresa May, it kept coming up and we couldn't answer the question. We had 3,000 volunteers delivered 1.5 million leaflets round the streets, to homes round the streets. 650,000 people visited the website, 8,000 emailed their candidates, and this figure from a polling company, 800,000 voters switched their vote from the Tories to either Labour, the Lib Dems or Greens because of school funding. And that led directly to Tory MPs in Ipswich, in Crewe and Nantwich, in Leamington, being unseated by people who were campaigning on the question of education cuts. And 3 very serious political commentators, including one for Newsnight, Chris Cook, tweeted about the NUT being the most influential force during the general election. So that puts us, we think, in a very good position to take forward these campaigns, given what I've described as the sort of combining of Tory collapse and the Labour Corbyn surge. So the NUT is in 2 strategic alliances when we think about this and as we go forward. One with the Labour movement through the TUC, for all its ills, but also with the organisation, the People's Assembly. We're in a very close relationship with the People's Assembly, which has given us access to an audience within the movement. The People's Assembly isn't a mass organisation, but I think it is the main organisation, anti-austerity organisation outside Parliament, and able to deliver demonstrations and rallies on a very big scale, as we saw last week. And then within education, we're in a very big alliance with heads, with other teacher unions and with parents, and starting to work with some of these parent campaigns that are springing up. And that requires some thought for us. We've got lots of parent campaigns, parents who've not perhaps previously been politically engaged. So how we work with them, how we relate to them, how we try and engage them, requires careful thinking by us and by our activists on the ground. So I'm probably going to get a signal. So in that climate, what we're trying to say and what we're talking amongst ourselves in the NUT is that what we do matters. Everything we do, we think matters. And we think, and we're having discussions about this, we're in a position now where we can get out of our routine, we're not retrenched. We're not in our comfort zone trying to rally our own side. We have to get out of that and try and look at how we deepen our organisation, what methods work, what kind of things, what kind of activities we should be involved in, and how we build a crucial unity across funding, across pay, but also across SATs. And sometimes I think that means you reach to the right of you in order to shift the centre of gravity to the left. You reach to head teachers in order to reach the parents that they can reach. And I think there's some of the lessons we're trying to learn from what was good and other things that didn't work in our campaign. So, I've got to finish, have I? Yeah, so, go back to where I started. I'm part of a dying breed. Probably Alan is here, and there might be a couple of other people. I started teaching in 1987. 75. Before SATs, before targets, before league tables, before Ofsted, before performance management, before performance-related pay, before the national curriculum. And do you know what? it wasn't perfect, but it was bloody good.
Yeah.
You know, people used to sit around and talk about how to excite children. What can we do? We used to be in and out of each other's lessons all the time, telling people, can you come in and see what I'm doing? I want to know if it's working.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's the kind of atmosphere. That's the kind of school we want, where children are... Education's the best gift we can give to children, and teaching's the best job. But at the moment, we're not giving that gift, and teaching isn't the best job in the world because of the things that Alan's described. So that's when Thatcher started her project. That's when the Tories, and then carried on by Blair, started their project to dismantle education, to break the teacher unions. Now, I sometimes get accused of being a pessimist. I'm not. I'm a glass half full person. I think I can still get a drink when the bar's closed and the landlord's taken them away. I'm still searching for a drink. But what I want to say, the reasons we should be positive, they started 30 years ago to break up education and to destroy the teacher unions. Thatcherism and Blairism are finished. Another school is possible, and the NUT is still standing. We're bigger, we're better organised, and in better shape than we've ever been for this battle that's come. And we're about to get bigger, because we're going into a new union that will have nearly 500,000 people in it. And that gives us all kinds of scope and all kinds of potential. So I think we should say, it's been bloody hard the last 30 years, and things are terrible, as Alan's described, and we haven't had the big breakthrough. But they haven't finished us off. They haven't completed their project. They're nowhere near it. So we should be positive. And we should say, as I said at the beginning, this is no longer an abstract, retrenched position. Another school is possible, and we should go out and fight for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Alex. And now Sarah will be the final.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope this microphone works. This time last year, almost a year ago, I don't know if Alan remembers, but him and I went off to Calais to work in a small school in the refugee camp over there. It was an amazing experience to be with Alan, because not only did he and I were teaching French next to each other, he also wrote about 4 poems, performed them to the people in the camp, and he's quite a phenomenal person to work alongside. So I'm a teacher in Lambeth. This is the borough that I work in. I'm a joint branch secretary of the NUT. Our head teachers in our borough often hit the headlines and not for the right reasons. So we have 2 head teachers in our borough who have hit the headlines. One for being on a salary of £440,000 for running 2 schools, and one on a salary for £375,000 for running 8 schools. I think when we are looking at cuts to education, a lot of us say, well, not everyone is having cuts at the same level. And I often refer to this book, which is from 2009, and it's called This Little Kiddie Went to Market, and it really looks at the origins of when education shifted from a kind of child-centred education to the version we've got now. And this book says that the whole idea of devolution and breaking schools up from the local authority and cutting schools up to so-called autonomy, it says here, the real goal of school devolution is not local control and autonomy, but to enable governments to abdicate responsibility for funding shortfalls. And I think as we see massive school cuts, we can see that is playing out across our schools, because academies who are sold the lie of if you go off and have autonomy, you'll be able to manage your budget, are having just as many budget cuts and cutting as many subjects as the rest of us. So we're talking about a lot about SATs and about testing, and I often go back to where did these standardised tests come from? And apologies if you've heard me say this before, but I think it needs repeating. So in the 1980s in America, there was a group of people called the National Alliance of Business, and they got together and they said, do you know what, we're having a problem because people are coming out of school and they are learning to challenge authority, and they are learning about labour laws and about women's rights and about black liberation, and they are questioning the bosses. And this is not healthy for our business. And they set about how can we change this. And almost everything that they set out to do in America in those times has now filtered, is now filtering through to us. So they said, and I'll just quote, if you don't mind. So, rather than studying possessive pronouns, students are learning how languages silence women and blacks. This is what they didn't like. So guess what? We're back to looking at pronouns and fronted adverbials. It is also has a whole range of demands, which is reducing teacher autonomy, which is learning by rote. In some cases, I'm quoting, students learn to read not from literature but from disconnected sentences on which they are then quizzed. And I always think back to when my daughter was doing her A-levels, and she was reading Great Expectations, and I said, oh, fantastic, I've got all the books I studied for my A-levels and O-levels on my bookshelf still. I've got Great Expectations, it's here. And she said, oh no, the teacher's told us not to read the whole book, because it will be a waste of our time, and we'll just have to read the photocopied extract that I have got here. So, you know, it's absolutely tragic when you are... but you know where the teachers are coming from, and you know the pressure that is put on them. And I didn't go to parents' evenings and say, you're all evil people and you should let my daughter read. I understood the pressure. And when I go into head teachers' offices as a union representative, often representing teachers who are broken and upset and are being told that they're not meeting the standards, while I'm waiting for the interview, I often see the pictures of children in 3 columns. The ones who are exceeding anyway, so we don't have to bother about. The ones who are never going to make anything, so we don't have to bother about. And this small group of children in the middle who our school lives or dies by whether they get a grade or not, that 1 point that makes the difference. This is how crazy our system is and how much pressure is put on teachers. I have people in schools that are told, when you assess children, you put a certain level on the computer, you are told, go away and put those levels in again until you get this amount of people passing. It is not, look at this child, assess them and then tell me what grade they are. It is, I need this many at this grade, therefore go back and tell me which children you're going to put in at this grade. That is sadly what happens up and down the country in schools all the time. I go into a secondary school, and when I walk in the entrance hall, it has a list up of how many days, the countdown to GCSEs. And I go in September and I see that bloody figure, and I just think those children in the atrium have got to come past and see that counting down to the only thing that matters, which is your exam day. It's absolutely tragic. I think... I want to talk a little bit about SATs and baseline, because Alan and I did, and all of us did lots of work about the baseline. And you know, we often say that some of the 6 private providers who were trying to make lots of money from our small children, our 4-year-olds, when they went into school in the first 6 weeks, they suggested this as an exercise. So teacher says the word carrot, I say carrot, you say carrot. The child says carrot. All right, now say, it was parrot. Now say the word without the p. Now, that is a very complicated linguistic exercise for a 4-year-old. So most 4-year-olds will think, why would it be useful for me to know how to say the word arrot? And what does it mean? And is it going to improve my reading and my communication? Of course it's not. It was an absolute nonsense, and we knew it was. But the DFE are now coming back for 4-year-olds. They did a consultation which finished a week and a half ago, and they asked teachers or parents and everybody, public consultation, we have a test in year 6, but we now want to ask you, when is the best time to start the first test to measure it from? Should it be at the age of 6, should it be the age of 7, or should it be the age of 4? There wasn't an option to say none of the above. Lots of us wrote, however, in an email, none of the above. So we wait to see what comes out of that consultation. But I take my hat off to another head teacher who's hit the headlines recently, and not for the same reasons as the one I mentioned before, but the head teacher in Little London in Leeds, who started the year off last year in September, and she said to her governors and to parents and to her local community and the local authority, she said, I'm not doing SATs this year. It's bad for the children and it's bad for education. And she started the whole year saying, I'm not doing it, and then she didn't do it. And because the testing standards people knew she was going to do it, they tried to come and visit her school on the week of SATs. She had booked a week in Whitby by the seaside, so she was not... She was not in school that week. That is fantastic. That is one head teacher. I think we have a massive responsibility to roll that out so that everybody has the confidence to do that. We do have policy as a union that we should be balloting our heads, because I think when you do that, you have to have the union behind you, your members behind you, and everybody needs to know that they will be protected. Teachers are leaving in their droves. Another school is definitely possible, and we can change things. And I think the Corbyn bounce has shown us that actually we can think the unthinkable. And I think we can say to heads and to teachers, we shouldn't be teaching this kind of SATs curriculum in September. We need to start off by saying that, and we need to make sure that we play our part in overturning these SATs and this baseline without waiting for a consultation or the answers, just by doing what is right and what is the correct thing to do as professionals and as human beings to the small children that we are responsible for teaching.
I'm going to get people to speak. Oh, a flurry of hands. I'm going to try and get you all in 3 minutes, absolutely max, so that you facilitate other people coming in. I think you are a parent, so I'm going to call you first, and then Jeff. Here we go. I'll try and use that one if you can.
Yeah, I'm John Parrington from Oxford, so I'm a parent, but I'm also a teacher of university students, and I want to talk a bit about science education, because one thing I've noticed teaching medicine at Oxford is even the high-achieving kids that we get in, more and more seem to be thinking in terms of learning facts as the idea of what science is about, which is the opposite for me of what science is about. For me, science is about exploration. It's about often finding the opposite of what you first expected to find. And I think this reflects what people have said about the influence of the testing regime. It's had its impact on science. One thing that really inspired me to do science when I was a student, poorly achieving comprehensive in Bradford in the 70s, but one thing that stood out for me was the Nuffield system, where you were supposed to explore science, to experiment, and that's really, I think, being marginalised in schools these days. And I've had some experience teaching, a very limited amount of teaching science as a scientist in schools in a completely different way, so I just thought I'd go through a couple of examples. One is that every year for Year 6 students at St Barnabas Primary School in Oxford, we go in there and give a little talk about sex, reproduction and DNA. So we talk about infertility and the biology of sex. But what I think brings the lesson alive is that we do practical experiments. So we show them how a sea urchin egg and it's not like Monty Python, and it's with my wife actually. We don't do anything like that. So we do sex under the microscope with a sea urchin egg and sperm. We get the kids to help me freeze objects, thinking about the way that we freeze embryos for IVF. And I think the thing that's really good at the end is that we let the kids extract DNA from a strawberry, and we talk, about genetics and DNA, that kind of thing. And it struck me that just how inspiring this was for the kids when a kid came up to me after the lesson and said, "Science is wicked." That's the best lesson I've ever had in the school. And the other experience I had of a different sort of age group in a secondary school was when I worked very briefly with an organisation called Creative Partnerships, which sadly have been lost all their funding now. But their idea was to use new means to teach science in the classroom. And what they basically did, if I just wrap up on this, we taught cosmology with the Northern Valley Theatre using dance and drama. So we got all these kids who had no interest in science but were interested in dance and drama, brought together, drama teachers, English teachers, science teachers together. The thing is, it was a great experiment and it really inspired the kids, but it takes money, it takes resources. That's the sort of vision I think we should be talking about. That's really teaching science in an inspiring way.
Right. Sarah, and then After Jane.
I think when arch-Blairite Andrew Adonis admits that the whole student loan system is in a state of total collapse and corrupt and should be abolished, it tells you something about the state that education policy has got to. And I think that's actually very good news in terms of people responding to Corbyn during the election. But I want to talk about school funding, both about the national campaign, but also about what happened at my school when we actually fought it over the last few weeks. Because I was sitting, like quite a few other people in this room, at NUT conference, and very last day, and we hear that Theresa May has called the election to give herself a 100-seat majority. And, you know, I got back to school the next day and people were really miserable, you know, like 5 more years, Corbyn can't win, you know, I'm sure the same thing for absolutely everybody. 2 weeks later, our head and governors launched a consultation on cuts, save 300,000, a tax on teachers' pay, get rid of support staff, you know, sort of typical package, mostly aimed at support staff, but also indirectly, therefore, at teachers and obviously at the education of our students. And I think what happened then was, you know, the NUT national campaign was fantastic, the way they worked with fair funding for schools, and people can talk about Crewe and Nantwich, about Leamington, you know, all those places over the country where it made a massive difference. And in Hackney, where I work, we had a really good campaign with parents. Parent at my school called a meeting. 20 people turned up the first week, 20 different people the second week, parents all over the borough. We ended up with 5 or 6 assemblies. We sort of copied Tower Hamlet's idea, but did them locally. I reckon we had 500 people in the park by my school on the day of our assemblies. Absolutely brilliant. Diane Abbott spoke very well at our education question time and so on. But actually, on top of that, my school balloted for strike action. Head was horrified. Why are you taking strike action before we finish our consultation? What, because we want to stop it? Okay. We had 35 people on the picket line. We had 30 people coming to the lobby of the governors the following evening. We didn't win everything, okay? 2 or 3 of the support staff have taken redundancy and so on. But actually, they rolled back on an awful lot. I reckon we won 80%. And actually, that was actually saying we will take action because we will work with parents. We will also work to actually, at an industrial level, to defend what's happened. And we've come out of it actually quite well. And I think it was, you know, it was the mood, the whole mood around Corbyn massively lifted it. And I think we can take that into the autumn term. We need to, in London, to be at the parents' demonstration next Sunday. But also, I think we do need to be saying at national level, are we going for a national demonstration on funding? Are we actually going to talk about some sort of national action over pay, which has obviously gone massively up the agenda in the last week? Because I think there is absolutely everything to play for in terms of a properly funded education system.
Yeah, I'm a parent from Bristol, and I think, alongside many other issues, I mean, I live in Bristol North West. It was the one out of 4 seats. It was the one which was a Conservative MP, and she went. And I would tell you, because of the margins, it was the question of education which did her over, big time. They are so, it was amazing actually. I had a Tory leaflet through my door, and there was this huge campaign, and we are involved in a huge campaign over hospital funding, and the Tory candidate is pictured outside the free school saying, look what I've done for the constituency, and didn't seem to think this was a slight problem when, for example, my child, he just sat there plugged into my phone, primary school, ordinary primary school, was losing a budget of £400,000. When I first read it, and I only have to repeat and whatever, I thought it was a bit of a lie, to be honest. I thought the local papers lost the, you know, put an extra nought on. So I spoke to her and she said, no, they are the right figures because I've given them to them, right? And it was of such a scale that you knew that if you got a campaign, it was going to run. And that's what happened. We had the demonstration, I think, 2 weeks before the election. 6,000 people. 6,000 people on the streets of Bristol. And I tell you, thousands of those people had never been on a demonstration before. We organised meeting after meeting in communities, but in working class communities, which, to be honest, hadn't had meetings about this, that and the other. They were in areas like places Southmead, Lockleys, etc. in Bristol, where we mobilised and started to have a connection with very significant numbers of working class parents who for the first time thought, A, this is an outrage, and this is about my child's future. If my life is rubbish, I don't want that for my kid. There's nothing that drives people like that. They want something better. And we're in an era where you think, is my kid's life going to be better than mine? And I come from a generation, to be honest, where you assumed that that was going to be the case, and therefore it mobilised people. The last point is this. All sorts of debates take place about strike action, parents with the NUT and so on and so forth. My experience in Bristol, we gave out 40,000 leaflets, by the way, and it was on a scale, I haven't got time to go into it, of massive. I didn't get one parent, I'm telling you, and I lived in 10, 15 schools, I didn't get one parent say, you know, there's an NUT logo on here, I don't really like that. They don't care. They care about their kids' education. And I think we have a possibility of actually uniting parents who want the best with teachers. I think we're in that situation, and therefore I think striking is a very, very important thing for us to do as parents, to back it, and I think we're in a position where we can do that.
You're next after this.
Yeah, I'm I teach in a primary school in Lambeth, and I wanted to talk a bit about the experience of being a teacher, because I think it's a contradictory one and a complicated one. But firstly, I want to say, you know, we hear a lot about teaching and all the problems with it and the stress and, you know, all of those kinds of things. But I want to start off by saying what an enormous privilege it is to be a teacher, actually, and not the joy you can take in being a teacher, to work with young people, to get the chance to shape their futures, to get a chance to see them flourish and develop in ways that you didn't think were possible, to learn from them as they're learning from you is an absolute privilege and a joy. And I think what we're seeing at the moment, particularly with the rise of Corbyn, certainly in my union branch, is a whole swathe of young teachers who, yes, they're frustrated, yes, they're stressed, yes, they feel that the workload is unbearable, that what we're doing to children in schools is unbearable, but who feel the same way that I do about teaching and want to fight for a vision of what education really should look like in this country, that kind of liberatory experience that we all want for our children. And, you know, this is the Marxism Festival, isn't it? This is about big ideas, not just the sort of minutiae of a workload campaign or lifting the pay cap, although all those things are hugely important. But I think what we want to get across in the education strand at this festival is that idea that education should be an emancipatory experience for our children. It should be a joy. It should be about liberating children's minds. We should start to talk in concrete terms about what education should look like. What does it mean to collaborate with children rather than to instruct them? What does it mean when the children are exploring the world at their own pace and in their own environment and in their own terms? And that's quite scary for teachers who've known nothing but the top-down curriculum that you just are expected to deliver to children. That's a scary thing to some people. How do children learn if you're not standing at the front instructing them? Those are the kinds of things that I think we have to start to talk about. And I just want to say finally that it is crucial now that we start to win a young layer of teachers who are hugely politicised around the Corbyn mood, who are starting to flock to union events because they see the union as something that is relevant and something that can start to make a difference in their lives and in their schools. We have to win them to at that socialist vision, that revolutionary vision. We have to start talking big ideas with them, not just the little minutiae, but obviously, you know, like I said, those are really important. And I think that is an absolutely urgent task that every revolutionary socialist has to set themselves over the next coming months. I think the opportunities are huge and we have to grasp them.
Okay, and then
I am a student teacher in Newcastle. You'll have to bear with me, a bit nervous. This is my 5th Marxism. It's the first time I've got up to speak.
well done.
Well, I'm a student teacher in Newcastle and I've had my eyes opened in more ways than I thought possible, and it's been a really rough ride, not least because I've gone into it as a socialist. And if you go in with ideas about how you want children to learn, it's a very, you know, it is an uphill struggle. And I've learnt a lot. For example, on a school trip, there was a year 5 child, it was a lass, and we'd been out in being out in the forest, and there was like den building and there was like team building activities and orienteering, really enjoyable experience. And she turned to me and she said, I really enjoyed today, and you know what, I didn't even learn anything. And I was like, well, hang on, what do you mean you didn't learn anything? What do you know, of course, you must have learned something. And she said, well, no, because we weren't doing any English or maths. And we had an interesting discussion about that. It might have been a throwaway comment, you know, from a 10-year-old, but for me it was a bit of a signifier of like children who are feeling a bit disempowered about their own learning, because she's had a really interactive and rewarding experience. It's almost like that doesn't count because you're not sat down looking for fronted bloody adverbials and all the rest of it. You know, so I think it's a signifier of kind of what we're heading towards. Now, a lot of you in this room would have been at the Vygotsky meeting yesterday morning, where we discussed the psychology of learning and how it's linked to lived experience and how learning is a social activity. I think for all of us, it's quite a straightforward idea. But if you're a capitalist, if you're in charge of a system and you want to create a generation of obedient workers, then the idea that learning is linked to lived experience is actually quite a dangerous idea for them.
Yeah.
You know, straightforward idea for us, but that's why they want to micromanage every little aspect of the education system. The whole idea of learning from your surroundings is frightening, and you see it in struggles. It's the same thing. They know that's how class struggle works, because if you engage in a fight against low pay or anything like that, you begin to recognise other injustices as well. And what I want to wind up with is this is why we need to connect the battles we face in education with the rest of the political battles we face against the system generally. Brilliant example of that in the North East is the Durham teaching assistants. They've been absolutely heroic, and they've engaged not just teachers across the profession, but also parents and children as well. And they're starting to have the council over a barrel, and now they're being offered a deal which was nowhere near what they were being offered in the first place. So that's the vanguard right there, I think. Thank you.
Woman here. Terry, after this.
Hi, my name's Lucy. I'm from Melbourne in Australia, and I just wanted to say a few things about the connection between what's been happening to you people and what's happened to us and how we're fighting back. Firstly, to say that the standardised testing regimes and the neoliberalism of education, it seems to have been founded here and in America, and it's hit us in a big way too. And we can see what's coming to us in Australia has already been happening here. And so there's a big responsibility on you guys. And it has been so fantastic for me to, not to cop it, but to be able to see how you guys have been fighting it. So, when I first started teaching, it was the first time that standardised tests had been returned in Australia for a long time, and there was nothing in Australia around about, what is this, where is it from, and so on. So I was looking up online and I found Another School is Possible, the book, and, talks from Marxism and so on, and that's how we've been able to kind of figure out what's been going on in Australia and start to try and find a response to it. I just wanted to touch on the connection between all the different bits and pieces, because the attacks on education have also, they come alongside all the other attacks that have been happening in terms of racism as well. And while, the UK and America has been exporting neoliberalism in education, Australia has been exporting racism in a really intense way. Refugee detention has been a big focus of our activism in the union movement in Australia. We've had kids who have been held in detention, taken back into detention, teachers who have been working in really hostile detention centres. And something really fantastic has, like a response to that, has come out of it, where teachers have actually taken strike action in defence of their students to stop them being taken back into immigration detention. We started wearing these T-shirts, Into School Teachers for Refugees, and it says close the camps, bring them here on the back. And our...
You need to wind up, sorry.
Our Minister for Education said, this is disgusting. It was the week that the PISA tests came out, and we were below Kazakhstan, shock horror. And our Education Minister said, this is the problem with teachers. They're teaching about these sorts of things. They're not teaching the standardised tests. Shame on you, back to work. And so that meant that even more teachers were ringing up saying, give me one of those T-shirts. I want one of those. We've got to get them on. So anyway, solidarity from Australia.
Terry, and then the woman there, and then you. Right. Sorry, too late to put your hands up now, sorry.
Okay. We've heard about the terrible situation in Britain where we try to test our 4-year-olds in weeks of starting school. It's not about building a relationship with your new teacher. It's about sitting down, do the test, stop your crying, and get on with it. We've also heard how the government wants to... the government wants to bring back these tests, but we haven't heard, disgracefully, is that the National Association of Head Teachers, the main teaching union in primary schools, they are now backing the testing of 4-year-olds. That is their stated position. That is a very worrying thing, it's awful. We heard lots about the different tests that happens in primary schools, in your Year 6, the Key Stage 2 stats, Year 2 and the Key Stage 1 stats, your phonics test, Braille slam, but we also didn't hear about, there's another test that 4-year-olds have to do, it's called the Early Years Profile at the end, and you're labelled Essentially, you're very clever, you're okay, and you're not very clever. And these labels have to be shared with parents at the end of the year. Something I'm really not looking forward to doing in the next couple of weeks. It's awful. But the thing I really want to talk about is about the age at which children start school in Britain. So I think this is an absolute disgrace and gets lots of problems that we have. In England and Wales, you have the lowest starting age in the world. You start after term after your 5th birthday. But actually, that's not when children start school. Nearly all children start school when they are 4, when they're 4 years old. But actually, that's not the situation, because 96% of 3-year-olds are in education or care, and actually lots and lots of those are in schools, okay? But that's still not as bad as it gets, because what's the official Ofsted line on it? We want a school starting age of 2. Because remember Michael Wiltshire, that horrible man? He said the best place for 2-year-olds are in schools. And I want to say, that's disgraceful. That is nothing short of absolute abuse of children. So I want to...
Need to wind up, Terry, sorry.
So I want to say, let's have that other school, but let's not make children start too early in it.
Right. This lady and the lady there.
Yeah, I'm a governor at a school in Sheffield, and obviously we have to attend all these meetings about how to improve your school's education. I'm very lucky. I am a governor of a very brilliant school. It's 37 different languages spoken in the school. We're doing things like Forest School. We're trying to get to make the balance between having, fun science and not just English and maths. But it's a battle, an absolute battle, because you're constantly looking at targets all the time. But I want to talk about, I went to a briefing session. You go every term, you have a governor's briefing session. And the discussion was about mental health in children. And as the stats go up, and is just confronted with you, the absolute fear it puts in me of the future generation that we're creating was appalling. And I got up and spoke and talked about the connection between, do we not think these testing all the time, these constant league tables, all this sort of stuff is what is causing the problem and the stress of our children, and talked about, we have to change it, and we're actually people that can change it. We need to be the voice of the schools. And people agreed, but there's a real fear, and they do agree, and they're really worried. But there's this gap between what they actually think and what they're churning out and having to do within the system. And I think that's what we have to break, really. And we have to break it by doing it on a united front. Teachers, parents, children, and governors. We cannot do these things separately. I can't just go and argue in a meeting room full of governors. We have to be united, and we have the opportunity with Corbyn and what people are changing. Because my parents, 37 different languages, they don't understand. All they want is they want their children not to get left behind. So they are churning out £20 to have a tutor because they really are desperate for their child not to get left behind, and it's understandable. Working class families living in the flats behind the school, they want the same opportunities as any other child. We have to give them the confidence to say, actually, there is a better education system. There is a chance that my child can enjoy their education but not get left behind. But I think we have to have a really tight strategy of how we do that. And that's what we need to go back into our communities and start to really build on.
OK, thank you. This lady here. I mean, a big apology, seriously, to all the hands that went up. I deliberately tried to actually choose people I didn't really know. So sorry to my friends as well as comrades. Last name.
My name's Jill Adams. I'm from Rotherham, and I work with children with additional needs right across the local authority. And about 7 years ago, I was really lucky to be involved in a project with the educational psychologists. And we decided to ask parents and children, what's it like? What's learning like for you when you've got an additional need? We didn't make that quite specific. So we asked 7 schools to volunteer for us to do the research. And all the 7 schools that volunteered were what, as practitioners, I would say were really, really inclusive schools, the ones that go the extra mile to make sure that the child got what they need to meet their additional learning need. So we got the parents focus groups in each school, and we asked them, what's learning like for your child, and what would make it better? And the stuff we got back was absolutely mind-blowing. It was heartbreaking. We collected all the narratives that the parents told us, and we put them together on a PowerPoint. And the quotes that we got was, you know, one woman said, it breaks my heart every time I go home crying every day. It gets so upset when he's got to do his homework, and homework was something that came up time and time again. And one of the quotes was, you know, I left him sat on the carpet sobbing his little heart out. God. Another quote was, this was quite funny, one woman said, well, things didn't get better until I mentioned that my sister was an Ofsted inspector. And the thing is, these were really inclusive schools, and what it was this awful pressure of this awful curriculum, and the fact that teachers had just got too much to do. From that, we developed a charter. We worked with parents in Rotherham and developed a charter called the Rotherham Charter, and that's now going national. It's all about parents working in complete co-production with schools. And the thing is that really, but I just love my job, because the people I work with, even though they've got all this tremendous amount of pressure, they'll still go the extra mile. They'll still say, I'll stay in at lunchtime to make sure he's safe, and I'll do this, and we'll buy that, and I'll swap Mrs. So-and-so if she can have time. And I think, you know, when we talk about another school is possible, I think we've just got to take that cork out of that bottle, because that willingness, despite all the crap that young teachers, how they've been taught, we're still blooming human beings, we've still got empathy, we still care. And I just think once we've got all this crap, once that's gone, I just think, you know, that it's absolutely unbelievable what we can achieve.
Lovely. Thank you. Okay, well, each one's going to get a couple of minutes to come back, so we'll start with Sarah.
Okay, thanks very much. Really interesting contributions. I think the last person really summed it up, that there is potential, and people who say, oh, teachers come out of teacher training if they go to it, or schools direct, and they don't know anything else. I think they know it's wrong, and I think they know what's right, and I think they are desperate to have a liberating kind of education. And I think you're absolutely right that we don't need to do much of a push, and if we had a movement that said, you know what, we don't want to do SATs, let's do something more creative, I think you would unleash a lot of teachers who were just waiting for that permission. The number of children that will be getting a letter, I think 40% of primary pupils, the SATs results were released last week, will be getting a letter to say you are below expected standards. It is absolutely criminal, and it's horrible to give those letters out. But there is an organisation called More Than a Score, which we've set up with the teacher unions and parents and loads of subject organisations. And we have a website, and we have developed an assessment, an alternative assessment. So if parents say to you, but how are schools going to know where my child is? You say, look, we've got this alternative way of assessing, and it's approved by people who know about education and not politicians. So I'd encourage people to have a look at More Than a Score and get the materials and use those to build that network of parents and teachers. And I'm hoping that we can... I always say that at the moment there is a bit of a wall between early years and the rest, which is why we really fought against baseline, because we said from nursery and reception there is a wall that says you can't compare the results from here to here, they're not compatible, and now they want to move that barrier down so that you can compare the results. So you're just going to put 4-year-olds at a table and make them write in the morning and do maths in the afternoon. And what we want to do is actually move that wall right up the school so that a play-based curriculum and a joy-filled curriculum is moved up the school. That is what we've got to gain. I don't think it's very difficult for us to pop that cork out and change things, but we need to go back and in our schools and communities just to spread that message and pop that cork. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Alex. 2 minutes, Alex.
I just want to talk about a couple of things that invitations we've had recently that have come as unusual invitations, but that have come as a direct result of the work that we've been doing locally, and I think they illustrate the kind of connections that we can make to bring people together in what I think, you know, can be a national campaign for education that feeds into Corbyn's idea of a national education service. Yesterday, I was invited to speak by the local council to 50 parents in their parent carer forum. And it was at the suggestion of parents who said, we want to hear from these teachers about education. And so it was really interesting because I followed 2 local authority inspectors talking about the curriculum, talking about SATs. And what was interesting about that, they were doing a factual, this is what you can expect, this is what happens at 6, this is what happens. But everything they said was laced with undertones of, we know this is rubbish. You know, these are local authority people. So, and on the back of that, we've now been invited to run workshops at their annual conference for 300 parents, and they've offered to email out our links and campaigning ideas to 1,000 parents. So the connections are there. You know, it wasn't obvious to us to go and seek that link, but they came to us. And then last week, I was invited by this organisation called Open City, who organise Open House, but they also run this thing called Architecture in Schools with groups of schools around London, and Jess's school took part in it. And we, on the back of our funding campaign, we were invited to take part in the judging, make a speech at the awards ceremony, which is in Canary Wharf, and it's just fantastic. You know, these schools were linked up with an architect's firm, and they did a design, you know, the design and build brief on what they think a school or a local area should look like. And just the imagination in it, you know, it's a bit like you can't test this. I was saying to the other judges, you can't assess this in any other way than, is it good?
Yeah,
you know? Or did the kids look like they were enjoying it? You know, and it was just fantastic to see that kind of work happening. But again, an invite that wasn't obvious that we would get. So I think this has been a fantastic discussion, really illuminating and exciting contributions, and clearly one we have to continue. And I would just say, if you want to look at alternatives, I think we could do a lot worse than look at Cuba. Look at what happens in education in Cuba. And I say that because the NUT is now committed to sending 2 delegations a year of lay people from associations can apply to go and look at education in Cuba. And it's eye-opening and jaw-dropping when you see what a country like that can achieve. Just 2 quick examples. They have a system where their student assembly debates what they want from schools, and about 5 years ago they sent a motion. They're able to send motion to the teacher union, which the teacher unions have to discuss and either reject or accept, and if they reject it they have to go back and explain why. And 5 years ago the student assembly said, we're fed up of hearing about how brilliant Cuba is. We're fed up, you know, we think we're not learning enough about the rest of the world. So they brought that to the teacher union, and with the student assembly developed a remodelled curriculum. 10 years ago, the teacher unions went to the government and said, we're too trammelled in what we teach. We're locked into our subjects. We want to teach the whole child. There was a concern about boys getting into drugs or violence and gangs, and they wanted to address it by going back to a more holistic approach to teaching. And the government response to that, the people who went on the delegation, the government response to that was, well, if you want that, how much money do you need for it? How much training do people need for it? They pilot it in one region, and then if it works, they amend it and whatever, and then they roll it out to the country. So it's a completely different relationship. It's not perfect, but it's the relationship between teachers and students, schools and the government is completely different. So it is really another vision of education. So if you are a teacher, if you are an NUT member, do apply to go on one of those delegations, because it really is... It really is fantastic. It's a fantastic experience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex.
I want to go back to the very beginning with something that John Parrington said, is what exactly education is. Because one of the SATs that actually was relevant to education was the science test about 20 years ago. It had this floating and sinking. You float and sunk a banana, a stone, you made hypotheses. I remember we had floated and sunk 8 times this stuff, and the banana disintegrated. And I had a new girl called Georgina who'd just come in from Barnsley, typical forthright Barnsley, you know. And I said, what's your hypothesis, Chuck? And she said, the bugger sunk. I thought there was more education in that than most days I went through. And then a couple of years later, they did what John said. They turned it into science fact. Now, there is no such thing as science fact. There are provisional judgments of what you have observed, tested, verified through experience. Many of the things we thought were certain 10 years ago, we've found that they're not. Every science teacher who does the same experiment every year will notice occasionally you get an anomalous result, because life does that. Now, that is what an education system should look like. Now, much of it actually occurred. I went to a Plowden primary school. I started in 1958, and we had a 25-foot square sandpit. At playtime, we were able to dam the stream.
Yeah.
We were able to climb trees at 4 years old, and nobody said health and safety, because if you go to Norway, they say the way to deal with health and safety is to take away the protective barriers, and if you're stupid enough to walk off the mountain, well, tough. Now, actually, I'm not saying throw our children off mountains, but
I don't know.
Fundamentally, it is experience and experiment. It is knowing that education is a journey whose destination is not verified, limited, and closed off at the beginning. It is a learning process. Now, that has to define everything we said. The second thing is absolutely what Jess Edwards said. I thought every contribution was brilliant. I picked on this one because I do feel that teaching is a privilege. I became a teacher in 1975. I did other things, but I have taught for most of my adult life. When I finished teaching 10 years ago, I still choose to go into 150 schools a year. When on Facebook I have 32-year-old young people saying, I had a brilliant time with you, that is fantastic. Every teacher will get that in a few years' time because of social... men don't do this very often from the northwest of England, but I just sort of went, and I just, oh my God. And that is what we all want out of teaching. And when you get the grad grindians that think it's all about data and testing and crushing the human spirit, that is wrong. Now, I'm going to read you a flawed but intelligent education minister. This is George Tomlinson, who was the Minister of Education in the 1945 to 51 Labour government. Now, I'm a rarity in this room. I'm a member of Liverpool Walton constituency Labour Party. We did quite well in the election. We got 85.7% Labour. And this is what George Tomlinson said in the period of the Attlee government, and it was flawed. He didn't get rid of grammar schools when he could have done. He maintained selection. He kept private education, and Clement Attlee thought private education was a positive thing. However, listen to these words. What qualities go to make a school teacher? The wisdom of Solomon, the patience of Job, the character of a saint, the knowledge of a doctor, a midwife, and a sea lawyer. These combined with skill and determination and the hide of a newspaper reporter adds up to the most difficult and rewarding profession. Have you ever heard words like that from Justine Greening? Have you ever heard words like that from Nicky Morgan, the most surprised woman on the planet? Have you ever heard those words from Michael Gove? He's back, the mummy rears up again. You don't. And do you know what? Actually, I've been a socialist since I was 14 in 1967. I was at Grunwick's. I was at Lewisham. I was involved in the miners' strike and the dock strike. I have fought for progressive education all my adult life, and do you know what makes my heart beat faster? We had 120 people at a social in Liverpool Walton, at which Angela Rayner spoke, and she spoke our language. And this is what important. Whether you're a socialist in the Labour Party or outside the Labour Party, we are part of the same struggle. Yeah. And when I see Jeremy Corbyn reminding me of when I was in this room in 1977 listening to Paul Foote talking about Shelley, and I hear a Labour leader saying, ye are many, they are few, come on comrades, shake your chains to earth like dew.